Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Definitely Talking podcast, episode 2. My name is Shanna Groves, and I started this podcast to spotlight amazing individuals in the deaf and hard of hearing community. I live with genetic profound hearing loss and wear a cochlear implant and hearing aid. You can find me on my blog, thebrittingmom.com. Joining me today is internationally known hearing health advocate, author, and speaker Sherry Everts. Sherry is the founder of the popular blog livingwithhearingloss.com and the co-author of the book Here and Beyond, Live Skillfully with Hearing Loss. I have a copy of this.
Wonderful.
She also is the executive producer of the award-winning documentary We Hear You. Sherry has an adult onset genetic hearing loss and hopes that by sharing her story, she will help others to live more peacefully with their own hearing issues. Prior to her advocacy work, Sherry had a 20-year career in finance. Welcome, Sherry.
Thank you so much, Shanna, for having me. It's great to talk with you today.
Yes. So let's start by, could you give us a little more background about your hearing loss and how you started doing your advocacy work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I first noticed my hearing loss when I was in my mid-20s, but my journey with it really began well before that, watching my father struggle with his own hearing issues. And he was highly stigmatized by it. He would do anything to hide his hearing loss. I remember he had his hair grown long over his ears, and I remember parties where he would just be sort of off by himself. So when I first discovered my hearing loss, I hid it, following in his footsteps. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. I'm not sure why, but this lasted for many, many years until I had children. And I saw them watching me do a lot of the same things that I had seen my father do, right? Faking it and laughing at jokes I hadn't heard. And I realized I was passing this stigma on to another generation. And because my hearing loss is genetic, I always worried, what if they developed it as well? So I decided that I needed to finally accept my hearing loss. I did and started wearing my hearing aids all the time and really trying to teach my family and friends what they could do to help me to communicate my best. And so then I turned to advocacy, really inspired by them, hoping that should they develop hearing loss themselves, they would be in an environment and a world that was more accepting and more accessible.
Wow, you have accomplished so much, and it seems like you and I have known each other for 15 years. And
I think so.
it seems like every time I turn around, you're accomplishing something more for the hearing loss community. I know that you served on the board of the Hearing Loss Association of America, and you also are a global speaker. You go to quite a few events. And I want to ask you, how did you, with your lived experience with hearing loss, how did you come about the idea to co-write this book with author Gail Hannon, Here and Beyond? How did you come to start that process?
Yeah, absolutely. I love writing and speaking about hearing loss because I feel like it's so misunderstood by the general population, but also by, all of us with hearing loss. We don't really necessarily understand a lot about hearing loss and all the skills and strategies that we can use to communicate well with it, especially at the beginning of our journey. And so that's really how the book came about. It was during the pandemic, actually. And Gail had reached out and said, let's write a book. And I said, about what? She's like, hearing loss, duh. Like, oh, okay, yes. But what we really tried to do with it is to create a little bit of an operating manual, and that sounds dry and boring. And the book is not dry and boring by any stretch, but to really put all that knowledge of the skills and the strategies that Gail and I had accumulated throughout the years, but also other people that we knew with hearing loss. And we know a lot of them through our advocacy work, and really just try to put it in one place so that people, when they had hearing loss, could understand that there are ways to live better with it. And we also share the book with the broader community of practitioners, hearing care providers, audiologists, instrument specialists, because we want them to also understand the lived hearing loss experience, and that living well with hearing loss and communicating well takes more than just the devices. And so we're hoping to send that message, not just to people with hearing loss, but to the broader community as well.
Very extraordinary. Now, I know that you know this, having worn hearing aids for how many years have you worn hearing aids?
Oh, wow. I mean, it's got to be 30 years at this point. Yeah.
You've worn hearing aids longer than I have.
Oh, wow.
I'm 22 years, so you've got about 8 years on me.
Okay.
Tell me a little bit more about your dad. And I know you mentioned that there was a stigma with his hearing loss. Can you tell me, as a child, what did that make you feel like to see hearing loss so stigmatized?
Yeah, I mean, as a child, you're pretty carefree. But one thing that I understood is that this was just an unmentionable topic. It was off limits. It was something that was just, forbidden to discuss, and that he was very sensitive about anyone knowing that he had his hearing loss. So we didn't discuss it in our family. We didn't discuss it outside the family. He never asked us to repeat things or to provide any kind of assistance or to move seats around at the table. And we didn't know what to do as a family. And he didn't really invite us to figure that out with him or provide any guidance about it. So I just knew that it was something shameful, right? Because if he wasn't wanting to talk about it and we couldn't talk about it, that's just what I took into my understanding of hearing loss. And that's why it was so hard for me when I started to have trouble hearing. I just was so scared that this was going to impact my life in the same way that my father had his hearing loss impact him. I saw him really isolating himself and pulling back in social situations within the family. And I just was afraid that I would be having that same experience.
Growing up with the stigma of hearing loss. Now, I come from a family, there's 5 of us, and my dad's side of the family, we have genetic deafness. However, my dad was hearing, so I did not have a role model in my home to show me a good example or not a good example of hearing loss. I had to kind of make up the rules for myself. And I agree with you that in the beginning, I think we have to come to a level of acceptance with our hearing loss in order to not see it as a stigma. And now shifting gears a little bit, let's fast forward to you started your career. You had 20 years in finance. Can you tell me what it was like to be, since October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month, we want to spotlight issues, but also some good things that we can do to accommodate people in the workplace. What are some things, maybe good and not so good, that you experienced working in an office with a hearing loss?
Yeah, absolutely. It was challenging for me because I was in a client service role. And so I, at that point in my life, was still really keeping my hearing loss to myself. I wasn't willing to self-identify or self-advocate. And so it really took a toll, for clients that I could hear well. I was, a model employee and really could perform my job function very well. But for clients that were harder to hear, I would maybe pull back, or I would avoid them, or I would just kind of do the nod and smile and fake it. And this is not, a good way to be at your job, any kind of job, but especially a client-facing job. I remember there was one time when I had traveled to meet the CEO of this large retail company. I was an equity analyst. I covered retailers. And I was meeting with him to understand the company better, to write a report about the company, and to make a recommendation about whether investors should buy their stock or not. And I got to the meeting, and he was obviously under the weather. He had a cold. And he said to me, I'm going to sit across this long boardroom table from you because I don't want to get you sick. And I just knew that was not gonna work. He is, especially the distance, right? But also he had a voice and a way of speaking that was very challenging for me. And I didn't normally let people know about my hearing loss in a work situation, but I had no choice. And so I said to him, I'm hard of hearing. I think if we're this far apart, I'll have a lot of trouble hearing you. I'll just take my chances with your cold. If you don't mind sitting closer to me, that would be great. And so he did. And we went through the meeting and everything was fine. And it made me realize, wow, I had just said this out loud. The client hadn't, I don't know what I thought he was going to do, leave the room, not talk to me, look down on me. And it just made my life so much easier. And so I wondered in that moment, why am I not just more open about my hearing loss, and why hadn't I been? And so that was a turning point in the workplace for me, is to just recognize that being open about it allowed me to advocate for myself and to perform much more easily and better in the workplace. So that's like one piece of advice I have for people, is to be authentic, to let people know about your hearing loss. And sometimes we worry that, they'll think we won't perform well, but I have been performing my job the entire time with my hearing aids, right? With my hearing loss, and was performing well. So it's just changing our mindset sometimes and having that confidence to know that we can be open about it. And that allows us that opportunity to ask for the assistance we need and to perform even better.
I could go back in time with you also, because we're probably similar ages. This was right before 9/11. And I had just been newly diagnosed with hearing loss. I had a newborn child come off of maternity leave. And I remember, I refused to get hearing aids for 2 years, by the way. And so that stigma, I can completely understand in the workplace, but I think a lot of it, and why National Disability Employment Awareness Month is so important, is, we do have that fear. Will our jobs be in jeopardy if we are authentic about our hearing loss? And how can we educate the leadership in these places of business that to be inclusive is actually a win-win? Because when you include everyone, you are opening doors for, greater opportunities, different solutions, and points of view. All right, so let's end our podcast today by answering a question.
Okay.
And this is a question that I ask each of my podcast guests. What is your superpower? And that is something that you're very passionate about. And we talk about hearing loss, but if there's anything in addition to that you think you're good at, or special skill.
Yeah, that's always a great question. I would say, in addition to sort of advocacy, I guess my superpower is just my commitment to yoga and my yoga practice. I try to practice yoga every day. I've been doing that for decades now. And I find that carving out that time to focus on not only my physical body, but sort of my mental health and that meditation aspect of it really helps me to live my life well, and also to approach my hearing loss well, because we need to bring high energy to that, right? Our brain is sort of moving, a mile a minute, trying to keep up with communication. And I believe my yoga practice helps me to do that, have the energy I need, and deal with any frustrations along the way.
Yes, I know that yoga, meditation, anything we can do to have a relaxed state of mind, because the experience of hearing loss in it can be stressful, and we want to have resources available to help us cope with that. Well, Sherry, I find that very interesting. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I wish you the very best with your future speaking and whatever you do with your writing and advocacy.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for starting this podcast and for everything that you're doing as well. You are a wonderful advocate, and I really admire that. So thank you for having me.
Great. And to all of our podcast listeners, viewers, thank you for taking the time to listen and watch and learn about the extraordinary individuals in the deaf and hard of hearing community. We will have another episode in a few weeks, so please stay tuned for that. Take care.